You've never met them in real life, but they seem to get you. You've never heard their voice, but you check your phone waiting for their message. How is it that people build relationships without any eye contact, without any touch or tone? Well, social information processing theory has the answer. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart, and today we are exploring social information processing theory. Now, this is developed in 1992 by Joseph Walther, and it tackles the critical question: how can computer-mediated communication, or CMC, support real, lasting relationships? Now, spoiler alert, it can, but it takes time and a lot of emojis. When computer-mediated communication first emerged, now think email, chat rooms, early forums, which are all probably before your time. But bear with me here. Many of the communication scholars assumed that this was inferior to face-to-face communication. They called it impersonal or cold and antisocial. But Walther challenged that assumption, and he said, sure, digital communication lacks nonverbals, but people will adapt. We'll find other ways to build those relationships. And here we are. He was absolutely correct. Now, some of the key assumptions with social information processing theory is that CMC users are goal-driven and relational. We also assume that the cues are adapted to the medium. So, for example, the use of those emojis, the use of a GIF. We adapt, we create new ways to use the medium in the way that we need to. And we assume that relationships can develop online, albeit maybe somewhat slower. You can kind of think of it as slow cooking intimacy instead of microwaving it. It's going to take a longer time, but if you've ever done slow cooking, the relationship, those flavors, they develop far better than they would had we just thrown something in the microwave. Anyway, this theory argues that the amount of time that people interact online is crucial because CMC is slower and less rich than a face-to-face communication. You can see this in action when you think about the amount of time it takes to send a bunch of text and talk through a situation versus just hopping on the phone and having that conversation. Now, yes, I'm a bit older, so this is going to be something that I relate to, but calling on the phone is still often preferred if it's going to be a longer, drawn-out thing because it can happen faster. It takes a little bit more time to do that over text because so much nuance has to be embedded and clarified via text. But maybe that's just because I'm not the greatest texter. Who knows? But people in general need more time to exchange the same amount of information when they're doing it using a computer-mediated means. This is what we call extended time, and it's a key piece of this theory. Now, another example is that in face-to-face conversations, a wink, a pause, an actual laugh communicates warmth instantly. In a text-based conversation, you have to type that all out. Ha ha ha, that was so funny. Crying face emoji. You always know how to make me laugh. It takes longer, but it still does get there. Now, another thing that we need to think about this is how we have and use cue adaptation strategies. For example, we can use verbal clarity and style. People online are going to need to use more descriptive words. They're probably going to have to do a little bit more self disclosure, and emojis can make up for the missing facial cues. Now, we also have chronemics or timing cues. The speed of reply communicates emotion. Fast responses versus slow interest. Well, these delays may signal detachment, especially if you're having a quick conversation going back and forth, and then all of a sudden, there's some long pause. The quickness of those dots to turn into words speaks quite loudly to the person watching for the dots. Now, we also have what Walther later introduced as the concept of hyper-personal affect, and he created this in 1996. And in it, he describes how online relationships become more intensive than our impersonal ones. Why, you might be wondering? Well, people now have the ability to carefully edit their messages. I can write a draft of a message, pause, read it, think about how the person might respond, and then edit it back and rewrite it. I can't do that in a face-to-face conversation without looking a little weird. These options also allow us to, in some ways, idealize their partners. We're getting the edited version, and because I don't see them, I'm projecting aspects of who they are through the text that I'm getting. So I'm able to imagine the best possible version of that person because I have these, I like to call them the blank spaces, where I get to fill in those blanks. There's also fewer distractions and likely less awkward pauses because, again, I can take that time. And when I'm face to face, I might get a little bumbly. I might get a little bit awkward. So, in short, less mess, more polish, because I have the time to do that editing. Now, we do have to talk about the critiques and the context when it comes to this theory. So, some really important strengths of this theory is that it explains how intimacy could happen even without nonverbals. It's also grounded in user adaptation. It's not just a platform limits, but it's how we use those platforms and adjust to get the goals met that we have. And it's predicting hyper-personal relationships. Before social media even exploded, this was something that we were thinking about and talking about, which I think is kind of cool. Now, critiques include this does assume users want that intimacy and that they want it through these channels. Critics also say that this doesn't fully account for deception and manipulation online. You know, catfishing. We can use these tools to edit and facetune and make the world believe we are who we are based on how we are choosing to present ourselves. And not everyone is always that honest. Lastly, the final critique to mention is that it may not hold up in high anxiety or high stake digital contexts. For example, job interviews. So this isn't a perfect theory for all of the different contexts that we might see computer communication being done. But still, this theory remains central in our understanding of digital intimacy, and it's more relevant now than ever. So to recap, social information processing theory says that relational closeness is possible online, but it's likely to go a bit more slowly. I would love to hear your thoughts about this timing issue, because it seems like these days with online dating and all of these different apps and tools to bring people closer together, I wonder if that slowness is still even a factor. We also talked about how people adapt to digital limitations with creativity and emotional effort. We're going to use those tools in ways that make it work for us. And finally, we recognize that sometimes online communication becomes even more intense than offline communication. All right, that's it for today. Now, join us next time on Communication Campus when we dive into social judgment theory. Yes, this is for all of you judgy judgersons. We're going to think about why we do this and a little bit about how we do this. Thanks again for giving me your time and attention, and I will see you next class. Keep communicating.